Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to what is going to be the first video on this channel. My name's Nathan, and today I'm going to be running you through my solution to day one of this year's Advent of Code. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what the Advent of Code is, it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a series of daily puzzles that start on December 1st and run through to Christmas Day. Again, as the name suggests, most people tend to tackle these with code, so writing Python, C++, things like that. However, I'm going to be doing these with Alteryx, which is a data preparation software or an ETL tool, depending on what you want to call it. So, jumping into the puzzle for day one, we basically have a bit of a backstory here. There's a group of elves that are traveling, and we need to find the one that's carrying the most calories because they're all carrying food. Really handy for us. We can see that each elf, when they're writing down the amount of calories that they have, each elf is separated by a blank line, which we can see here, which is really convenient for us because it's an obvious identifier of the next elf that we can use to index. Just below we get a sort of run through of the example. So we can see here that this is elf number 1 and it's carrying 6,000 calories, just the sum of 1, 2 and 3,000. Line separator, next elf is carrying 4, line separator, and so on. So for part 1, all we're asked to do is look at all the elves, add up their total amount of calories, and find whoever's carrying the most. So if we go ahead and jump into Alteryx, this is basically the workflow that I use to tackle day one's challenge. The first 3 tools we can pretty much look past. This is literally just bringing the data into Alteryx and splitting it out from a single record into multiple lines to get it in the right format that the puzzle is actually in. The first sort of actual tool that is doing anything to start the challenge is our multi-row formula. And multi-row formula is probably one of the great things about Alteryx. Generally, when we want to write expressions and evaluate things that are going on, we tend to look across lines. So maybe one cell multiplied by another. But what the multi-row formula allows us to do is look forward or backwards and use values from different records. So to create the index that I sort of mentioned earlier, all we need is a really simple if statement. And all we're saying here is if the line is empty, because we know that all of the elves have a blank line separating them. If the line is empty, then all we want to do is add 1 to our index. So if I scroll down a little bit, you can see each time we see a blank line, 1 gets added to the index, which identifies our new elf. Now, if you're looking at this statement and wondering how it's so short, this is what's known as an immediate if statement. So instead of writing it out in full, so if X then Y else Z, we can literally just write it out like this, which is a nice little perk if you're just writing very simple statements. So all we do is write IIF and then open bracket the statement to evaluate. So here I'm checking is download data empty, comma separator, what to do if that statement is true. So in this case, when it's true, when we find an empty cell, we want to add 1 to the previous row's ID. Comma separator, what to do if that statement is false. So if the row isn't blank, then we obviously want to keep the same index because it belongs to the same elf. And that is about it for that tool. Now, this formula tool is completely unnecessary. When I was initially going through this challenge, I thought that the elf ID would matter. I sort of started rushing through the workflow and forgot the actual purpose of the challenge. I actually thought that the elf ID is what needed to be entered at the end instead of the number of calories. So, and I didn't think it would be zero based, so I basically just added one to all of these. But yeah, it turns out that the elf ID wasn't important, and even if it wasn't zero based, I could have just started this count at 1 in my multi-row formula by adding a little bit more to that. So again, formula tool was unnecessary. Now the select tool, all I've done here is basically cleaned it up. You can see previously I still had my URL field that I chucked into the download tool, and then the sort of response from the download tool as well. So I've just removed those totally unnecessary fields. And because I'm going to want to sum each elf's total, I also want the number of calories to be numeric, whereas all of the data came in as a string. So all I've done is just change the data type there to a numeric one, so that we can sum in the next step. Now, the next step is literally just a case of aggregating. So we know which elf each line of calories belongs to. So we just need to group by elf ID and then do a sum of those calories. And that gets us the aggregated calorie count for each elf. Now, part 1 asks us to find the elf with the carrying the most calories. So all we want to do is just sort calories in descending order, and then we can use a sample tool to just take the top 1 record, which gets us a calorie count of 70,698, which was indeed the answer for part 1. Now, with the advent of code, every day has 2 parts, and part 2 is generally an extension on part 1. For day 1, this was a really generous one. You'll see as we continue going through these solutions that some part 2s require quite a lot of extra work. But in this case, it was quite a simple extension. So instead of the top 1 elf, they wanted to know how many the top 3 were carrying altogether. So if we jump back into Ultrix, this time, instead of just taking the top 1 record, I'm just taking the top 3. And then to get that answer into a single cell, I just aggregate that further to get the total of 206,643, which was my part 2 answer. So that's about it. This one was really easy. Day 1, I guess, lowering us in slowly, but as we continue to go through these, you'll see that some of the days are pretty tough. Some of them involve macros, even nesting macros inside each other, so there's some fun solutions to come. But yeah, that's about it for day 1. Hope you've enjoyed, and thanks for stopping by.